Hi, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to the Morgan. My name is Jennifer Coulter. I'm the Director of Education and Public Programs, and I'm so thrilled to welcome you all here tonight in person and also via live stream as we kick off our series of conversations with Maria Popova. Tonight, we're joined by Marie Howe, and in November and December, Debbie Millman, Paola Prestini, and Sophie Blackall will join us, so please come back for those conversations as well. So just out of curiosity, by a show of hands, I'd love to know who has been to the Morgan before this evening. Great. And is anyone joining for the first time? Amazing. Well, welcome to both new and returning visitors. We're so glad to have you. So if you're just getting to know the Morgan, we are a place where art and literature and history and music come together with a collection that tells the history of human creativity from antiquity to today. And we have an incredible range of objects that from different time periods, cultures, and ideas. So when I first started working at the Morgan about a year ago, it is probably not going to be surprising to you that one of the first people I thought of was Maria Popova. I was thinking about how to make connections across time and place through our objects and how to connect them to our lives today. And who better to take us on a journey of ideas across time and place through the lenses of wonder and awe and inspiration than Maria. And to my delight, she agreed to join us for a series of conversations with a number of the most brilliant women in her orbit to talk about art and life and creative practice. So tonight, we are lucky to have Marie Howe here. Marie Howe has a new book that just came out in April of this year. It's New and Selected Poems. It is a book I have read and reread and taken on trips, and I can't recommend it highly enough. From 2012 to 2014, Marie Howe was Poet Laureate of New York State. She is the poet in residence at the Cathedral Church of St. John the Divine and a chancellor of the Academy of American Poets. And Maria Popova thinks and writes about our search for meaning, sometimes through science and philosophy, sometimes through poetry and children's books, always through the lens of wonder. She is the creator of The Marginalian, born in 2006 under the name Brain Pickings, which is included in the Library of Congress Permanent Digital Archive of Culturally Valuable Materials. She is the author of the book Figuring, which features both Blake and Whitman, some of our springboards for our conversation this evening. And the maker of the live show, The Universe in Verse, a charitable celebration of the wonder of reality through stories of science winged with poetry, which is also now a book that just came out earlier this month. It's a beautiful book, and we have all of these books, signed copies, for sale this evening. So please stop by and check them out after the talk. So now I am so thrilled to welcome Marie Howe and Maria Popova.
Hello, beautiful people. So scattered. If you feel like coming down, Whitman was all about unifying the nation, so come on down if you feel like it. So thinking about tonight, I was reminded of something Shelley said almost a century before Whitman about poets being the unheralded legislators of humankind. And I thought about Whitman seeding these seeds of the personal and the political sprouting from each other, and how much of his language has permeated our culture in ways no artist can ever imagine how their work is going to live. For example, his very famous line, "Every atom belonging to me is good, belongs to you," made its way to the prelude of my first book and a beautiful poem of Marie's, and it has touched so many people. So I would love for us to open with Marie's poem that has this subtle reference to Whitman and takes us to this place of common belonging that he so lived in. And here it is a century and a half later in this new poet of the ages. Would you mind?
Not at all. Hi, everyone. Can you all hear me? Yes. Well, just a bit of a preface, I had been, like many of us, for years trying to understand the cosmos, and I was reading Carlo Rovelli's, was it 8 Lessons in Physics, and Astrophysics for People in a Hurry. There were all these books I was trying to understand, and it was right around the time Stephen Hawking died, and I was trying to understand his book, which I really couldn't, but I was trying to take in the reality of the singularity. I didn't even know that was the name for the original tiny, tiny matter that Hawking believed blew up in the Big Bang into everything that is. Just to check in, how many of you believe in the Big Bang theory? Oh, great. There's a lot of us then. Thank you for your company. So it's so hard to understand, it's so hard to conceive of. But Maria was about to give us the universe in verse. This extraordinary evening of science and poetry. And so I was trying to write something in for her, and I kind of gave up. And in giving up, this poem came through, and it's called The Singularity After Stephen Hawking. Do you sometimes want to wake up to the singularity we once were? So compact, nobody needed a bed, or food, or money. Nobody hiding in the school bathroom, or home alone, pulling open the drawer where the pills are kept. For every atom belonging to me as good belongs to you. Remember, there was no nature, no them, no tests to determine if the elephant grieves her calf or if the coral reef feels pain. Trashed oceans don't speak English or Farsi or French. Would that we could wake up to what we were when we were ocean. And before that, to when sky was earth and animal was energy and rock was liquid and stars were space and space was not at all, nothing. Before we came to believe humans were so important, before this awful loneliness. Can molecules recall it, what once was before anything happened? No I, no we, no one, no was, no verb, no noun, only a tiny, tiny dot brimming with is, all, everything, home. Thank you.
You know, it's interesting that Whitman called himself a cosmos.
Yes.
He identified himself in Leaves of Grass. The first reference to himself is, I, a cosmos of Manhattan, a sun. But he spelled it with a K the German way, as Alexander von Humboldt's great book Cosmos, which had come out in his lifetime. And it was all about this interconnectedness of nature. No I, no we, no
nature.
No nature, right? Nature as this kind of constellation of connection, no individual things. And yeah, go on.
Well, I was just going to say, it's so easy to say the line quickly, isn't it? Every atom belonging to me as good belongs to you. I mean, if we really, truly, truly believed that, then every time we drank from a plastic bottle and put it in the garbage, we'd be stuffing it into our own mouth, you know? we would be, I mean, to really believe that every atom belonging to me belongs to you, and to the whale, and to the tree this was, and everything, it's beyond words.
And that was to him, right, how to be a living poem. Where
Yeah.
he opens leaves of grasswood, love the sun and the earth and the animals, give alms, in that whole, the preface of Leaves, the 1855 preface.
Yeah. He really saw into reality. He really saw it. I feel like he really had, he had like a flash of understanding that propelled that whole poem, you know, and as all of these flashes do, as time went on, it became a story. Yeah, story of the flash, but the flash itself made that poem.
Made that poem and made it then so much easier for him to just annihilate all these human differences over which wars are fought, and all the divisiveness, and that is essentially how we got to his love of Lincoln and "Oh Captain, My Captain," which is one of our items in the collection here at the Morgan. This is Whitman's hand, and about this is in the 1860s, right after Lincoln died. At the end of his life, in the final years of his life, he fleshed out some of these ideas of interbelonging in a poem called America that he wrote. It's thought that he wrote it in 1889 or 1890, and that there is the only surviving recording of his voice is of him reading the poem on a wax cylinder recording, which is we're going to hear it, but I'm going to read it first because you can't really make out his words. So this is what he writes. And it's poignant, too, that we're gathered here right before, so close to the election. He writes, "Center of equal daughters, equal sons, all alike, endeared, grown, ungrown, young or old, strong, ample, fair, enduring, capable, rich, perennial with the earth, with freedom, law and love, a grand, sane, towering, seated mother, chaired in the adamant of time."
The word you can really hear in this is ample. Ample.
Like, not a word. I could not make out a word, but his voice, he sounds so much more aged than he is. He's 70 years old in this recording, which is pretty young.
He's an old 70.
He's an old 70. He was an old man at 35, you know?
But Maria, did you all hear that ample? He loved that word, too.
Brooklyn of ample hills was mine, he wrote in Crossing Brooklyn Fair.
Can I reread it one more time and hear it one more time?
Read it? Do you have it? Do you want me to read it?
But mine is called Manhattan, not America.
Manhattan is a different poem.
Center of equal daughters and equal sons?
Manhattan is the one that goes, "Give me the silent, splendid sun."
All alike, endeared, grown, ungrown, young or old?
That's America, yeah.
Yeah, I probably mistitled it. Okay, here we go. Center of equal daughters. Well, just thank you, Walt. Equal daughters, equal sons. All, all alike, endeared, grown, ungrown, young or old, strong, ample, fair, enduring, capable, rich, perennial with the earth, with freedom, law, and love, a grand, sane, towering, seated mother, chaired in the adamant of time. He called our country that, right? A grand, sane, towering, seated mother. He thought the United States itself was a perfect poem, that every territory and state combined together made a poem. But
And he served, people probably know, he served as a volunteer nurse in the Civil War and sort of ministering to sick and dying soldiers, writing letters home on their behalf, some of them illiterate. What would it be like to receive a letter from Whitman not knowing it's from Whitman, thinking it's your son Jimmy? But so after the Civil War, he wrote this beautiful essay called Democratic Vistas, which was kind of his take on the future of democracy, in which he argued that a truly democratic society can only ever be a feminist society. Now, this is at a time when so few of us were rightful citizens of the nation. Basically, only white men over the age of 18 could vote and shape the fate of the nation. And here's Whitman saying, and this is what he wrote in this essay. He said, of all dangers to a nation, there can be no greater one than having certain portions of the people set off from the rest by a line drawn, they not privileged as others, but degraded, humiliated, made of no account. And then he said, America, if eligible at all to downfall and ruin, is eligible within herself, not without.
say it again.
And that's a
say it
mic
again.
drop. America, if eligible at all to downfall and ruin, is eligible within herself, not without. And then he said, always inform yourself, always do the best you can, always vote. Now, I get to vote this year for the first time in my life. I was just naturalized last year. And I do not for a second take it for granted that I get to, because if I lived in his time, I wouldn't, as most people I know actually wouldn't. And he really kind of was so far-seeing in this way, and that's partly why he so admired Lincoln, because Lincoln, for whatever flaws he may have, he also saw far ahead into the landscape of possibility for this country.
Yeah. Well, Lincoln, he was hated by so many people, but he was willing to risk everything for the union of the country. And, he did risk everything. And it may have been a different outcome. And he had some generals who were not good generals, and I was reading, both Maria and I love this book, Specimen Days, which is Walt Whitman's prose, a lot of his journal entries, and he writes vividly about what the war was like, and it's brutal, it's butchery, and these are brothers and friends and everybody just killing each other at arm's length, but he loved Lincoln. When he went to Washington to work in the hospital tents, he at the end of the day, he would go home and bathe and eat, and then he would go and stand on a certain street corner because Lincoln would be leaving the Capitol to go back to where he slept at night, and he would wait on that corner to nod to Lincoln when he went by. He really felt a tremendous identification with Lincoln. And he came very close to meeting him, but never did. He was standing in Lincoln had a secretary who's the guy we all want to be our secretary for the rest of our lives. And he organized everything for Lincoln, Hayes. And Walt Whitman was in Hayes's office one day and saw Lincoln talking to someone, but he thought there'd be plenty of time to meet him.
And there is a story in multiple of the Whitman biographies, which may or may not be apocryphal because he was such a great mythologizer. He's the second most photographed American of the 19th century after Frederick Douglass, and he really kind of milked his image in a way. But he writes about how Lincoln had leaves of grass and allegedly was reading it one day and then looked out the window and saw the gray-bearded poet down there and said, "This is him, this is him."
He said, "That is a man.
That is a man.
That is a man."
Yeah.
Now, but the truer story is Lincoln, when he was in Illinois, his law partner, what was his name? His law partner was the guy who really loved the Transcendentalists. He loved Emerson, he loved Thoreau, he read everybody, and he heard about this new book, Leaves of Grass, that many people wouldn't even have in their homes. And he went and bought it. And Lincoln and this, what's his name? Forgive me.
They slept in the same bed. They roomed in the same house.
They had two offices and then like kind of a couch and a coffee table and chairs in the middle room where everybody would come and hang out and talk politics and gossip. And he put Leaves of Grass right there on the table, like here. And people would come and go, oh my God, you got that book, you know, and everybody would talk and laugh about it. And one day Lincoln came out and lay his long length on the couch, opened the book and read silently for half an hour. And the joke is that he never read silently. He used to annoy his law partner because he had to read out loud in order to take it in. And his law partner would say, why do you have to do that? And but this time he read it silently and then, only then, began to read it out loud. So there are many theories that Whitman actually influenced his speech writing by the gorgeousness of Whitman's parallel structure and anaphora. But the point is that both of these people believed that in this great experiment, that we could survive this terrible, wrenching separation and wound between the South and the North, and slavery and no slavery, and the agricultural culture and the increasingly industrial culture of the North. And that they really believed that it could be healed and we could move on, which I think is so important for us to believe right now.
And to me, what's so moving is that Whitman saw identity as just the surface layer of being, and beneath that, I mean, I come largely from the world of science, beneath that he thought about time, how it's not just that we are not divided across identities, but we're not divided in time. We're not islanded in time in this political moment, that everything's happening, has already happened, and will keep happening. My favorite poem of Whitman's is Crossing Brooklyn Ferry. I got here on the ferry, and I crossed the East River that he crossed on the same waters that have, washed away so many lives and will wash away ours. And I just want to read you a little portion of it, because to me that is kind of the substratum, the undertow of his view of humanity. And also he thought of ferries as great living poems, he called them. I ride the ferry all the time, and I think that all the time. So here it is, just a portion of it. Flood tide below me, I see you face to face. Clouds of the west, sun there half an hour high, I see you face to face. Crowds of men and women attired in the usual costumes, how curious you are to me. On the ferry boats, the hundreds and hundreds that cross returning home are more curious to me than you suppose. And you that shall cross from shore to shore years hence are more to me and more in my meditations than you might suppose. The impalpable sustenance of me from all things at all hours of the day, the simple, compact, well-joined scheme, myself disintegrated, everyone disintegrated, yet part of the scheme, the similitudes of the past and those of the future. Others will enter the gates of the ferry and cross from shore to shore. Others will watch the run of the flood tide. Others will see the shipping of Manhattan north and south, and the heights of Brooklyn to the south and east. Others will see the islands, large and small, 50 years hence. Others will see them as they cross the sun half an hour high, 100 years hence, or ever so many 100 years hence. Others will see them, will enjoy the sunset, the pouring in of the flood tide, the falling back of the sea of the ebb tide. It avails not, time nor place, distance avails not. I am with you, men and women of a generation or ever so many generations hence. Just as you feel when you look on the river and sky, so I felt. Just as any of you are one of the living crowd, I was one of a crowd. Just as you are refreshed by the gladness of the river and the bright flow, I was refreshed. Just as you stand lean on the rail, yet hurry with the swift current, I yet stood and hurried. What is it then between us? What is the count of the scores of hundreds of years between us? Whatever it is, it avails not. Distance avails not, and place avails not. I too lived. Brooklyn of ample hills was mine. I too walked the streets of Manhattan Island and bathed in the waters around it. I too felt the curious, abrupt questionings stir within me.
But then later in the poem, he says, my favorite part is,
The dark patches?
he says, it's happening now, isn't it?
Yeah.
Wait, what is that part?
I only took those portions, but I know what you're talking about.
It's happening now.
It is not upon you alone the dark patches fall, the dark through its patches upon me also. And then he goes into that's happening, the blank space.
So like, now you're reading the poem, right? And he just said, I too is here, I was here, distance avails not, time avails not. And then he goes, it's happening, right? Like, you know. And you're like, yes, it is. Like, he loves the word electric. And it's an electric moment where he says, it's happening, isn't it? What I spoke of before, it's happening. And you're like, yes, yes, yes. And you're one, you're there. It happens in the reading of the poem. I urge you to read the poem when you get home. Crossing Brooklyn Ferry. Before there were bridges.
Right.
No bridges.
And it's also astonishing that he talks about himself then in the past tense. Did you notice how he switched? I was.
Yeah.
So he's already imagining himself dead.
Dead. And he's talking to us.
To the living, to us, the not yet born, the living.
I was here.
Yeah.
I was the man. I was there. I saw. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What I love about Whitman too is he says, I am the cosmos, K-O-S-M-O-S, but he also says, one of the roughs.
One of the roughs.
He loved the so-called common people. He was one of the common people. He wasn't educated beyond the 7th grade, 6th grade. You know, he was he taught himself everything. He spent many of his days, I didn't know this until recently, riding along with the, what buses were then. What were they called?
Coaches.
They were like long wagons with horses pulling them. So instead of a bus, this long horse-drawn wagon would pull up and you'd jump on and there would be these long plank, benches that you'd sit down on. And he loved to be with the drivers,
And lived and loved one of them, Fred.
He did. He fell in love with one of them.
Yeah.
But he would sit up with the drivers and just because he was he wanted to see everything in the city, and that was the way to do it too. And they often didn't charge him.
That's how he rode the ferries too. He wasn't going anywhere. He just rode to see the ebbing flow of humanity, he said.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's interesting because we also have Blake tonight.
Yeah.
How polar they are in some ways and how kindred they are in some ways.
So kin.
And there is actually only one direct link between Whitman and Blake, and her name is Anne Gilchrist. Anne was an English woman who grew up as a tomboy loving science, married this long-haired lawyer named Alexander Gilchrist, and they bonded over their love of poetry, came upon Blake's poem, The Tiger. Now, Blake had died months before Anne was born and was buried in a pauper's funeral in the outskirts of London. He was a completely obscure artist and poet by the time she was a young woman who the few who knew of him thought was a madman. And The Tiger is the only poem of his that kind of made it into some anthology.
And he was a printmaker.
He was a printmaker, and the etchings and the engravings were really kind of what he was known for to not many people. So here's Anne and Alexander coming upon Blake and saying, oh no, this man was a genius and he needs to live on. So they decide to write a biography of Blake, which is very laborious work because there's so little that survives. In fact, the British Library discarded the few things of his they had, they threw it away, and Alexander showed up and was like, I'll take it. And so, but Alexander was trying to be a writer, but he suffered from very severe depression, poor health, so he could never really deliver on his deadlines. So Anne started writing. She started writing about science. She was writing popular science essays about the conservation of energy and the origin of starlight and just sort of science. So then, 7 years into their Blake project, Their eldest daughter, Beatrice, contracts scarlet fever and barely survives, and just as she's recovering, Alexander contracts it and dies. He's 33, and Anne, grief-stricken, saves herself by immersing herself in the Blake work. And in 1863, she publishes A Life of Blake, which becomes, with the help of the Rossetti brothers, so they're Christina Rossetti's brothers who are publishers, they publish her book, and it becomes, in our modern parlance, a bestseller. Blake certainly goes from an obscure madman to a celebrity genius. Now, a couple of years later, an artist friend of hers gives her a copy of Leaves of Grass, which at this point has not been published in the UK, and as most people know, in the US it was received with a sort of tide of indifference with some ridicule, you know. And she reads it and she is like, who is this guy? He is the next great genius after Blake. So she writes an anonymous review, but really like love letter to Leaves of Grass that she publishes strategically in a Boston paper. And then Whitman is sitting there in Philadelphia and is like, whoa, who is this stranger who is my greatest champion? So he somehow writes to the Rossetti brothers, somehow finds out that it's Anne Gilchrist, and sends her this letter of gratitude. And she writes back like a full-on love letter to Whitman. And so begins a very complicated and confused relationship, epistolary relationship. She decides he is her soulmate. He, despite being very, very gay, does not discourage that, and in fact, at some point, takes the ring off his finger and mails it to Anne, who thinks it means something.
But it did.
It did. But nonetheless,
He was also queer, not gay.
He was like, queer. Yes.
I embrace multitudes.
And I think also people get very seduced by adoration and mistake it for love. That's just a possibility, but nonetheless, she decides then that she's gonna pack up her 3 young adult children, her piano, her sheet music, her books, her china, board a steamer, and move to Philadelphia to be near Walt. Now, the interesting thing about biography is that we get to piece together lives based on the records of absence, right? So we only know who people were to each other when they were apart. In letters and diaries, one-sided, you know. But we never know what actually happens between people in the proximity and intimacy of encounter. So no idea how that conversation went once she showed up. But once they decided they were not going to be lovers, they ended up becoming lifelong friends. And Anne, first of all, he considered her the reason Leaves of Grass became what it was. He considered her her closest friend, and when she died of breast cancer quite young, in her mid-50s, he mourned her so much, and he likened her to Lincoln.
Yeah.
So she is now, without her, we wouldn't have Blake as who he is to us now, but we might not even have Whitman. So with that, moving on to Blake.
Well, I just want to say a couple of things.
Yeah.
Can we say a few more things about Whitman? Just in terms of how Whitman, can I just move into how Whitman can help us? Blake, too. I mean, Whitman opens spaces within his psyche and in his heart that can help us, I think. You know, he wrote these he imagined other people. He wrote these long lists of just imagining people right this minute what they were doing, you know. So the cook is making, pancakes at the diner down the street, or making a grilled cheese sandwich. You know, the cab driver is putting on the brakes at the red light at Madison and 36th Street. He wrote these long catalogs where he imagined other people, what they were doing at that moment. And I was thinking, if we did that for even 1 minute a day, how our lives would change just within a block. If you just imagine right now, somebody's waiting for the elevator. Somebody has to pee and they can't find a bathroom, which in Manhattan,
right now,
In New York, right? Someone's walking up Madison Avenue right now, hoping there's a Starbucks nearby. Somebody is, you know, and if we just did that for 5 minutes each day, and then we kept enlarging the circle, larger and larger and larger. So now we're in Florida, now we're in Texas, now we're in these other places, and we're imagining folks, you know, in their specificity, but who are just like us. I feel like that is a spiritual and a political act. And that's really how he lived.
That's the thing, the specificity, right? To him, other people were not an abstraction.
Never.
Were not an abstraction. And he left New York because he got fired from the Brooklyn Daily Eagle for writing anti-slavery editorials. The owner of the Brooklyn Daily Eagle was pro-slavery. And he wanted to understand the reality of people he felt deeply for, who in New York were just a political party line. So he went from a city that had 3% people of African descent, took his 15-year-old brother and went to New Orleans, where it was 30% of people, and it was a reality, like a specificity of life. And he pulled down an auction, a slave auction advertisement from the wall, and he kept it for the rest of his life on his desk, he said, as a warning. And worked it into one of his most poignant poems that is about sort of mocking the auctioneer who sells human beings as like meat in a butcher shop, you know. And he writes about the wonder of the brain and like what it is inside a human being.
But he would also imagine the auctioneer. I mean, that's what I think is radical about him. I just heard someone say the other day, a poet watches without judgment. And in some way that's true. It doesn't mean you don't have a moral compass, but the auctioneer, as well as the person being bought and sold, it's a terrible idea. It's offensive even to try to imagine, but that's what I think he calls us to do. To imagine the people we would not want to imagine and find ourselves in them. I think that's part of his genius.
And he says, I am the poet of slaves and the masters of slaves.
Yeah, and the masters of slaves. I am the poet of the masters of slaves. I am the poet of the slave. And that, especially, I was talking to the cab driver up here. I took a cab, and amazing man, came from Ukraine 25 years ago, not 25, 1975. No, 75. And we were talking about, trying not to be us and them. And how difficult it is not to be us and them right now. And how Whitman would say, I am the master, I am the master, I am the slave, I am everyone, to try to imagine into the humanity of every single person.
And in fact, despite it beginning with I celebrate myself, the most commonly used word in Song of Myself is the word you.
Yeah.
Because everyone to him was a you, was a thou. Yeah.
And he includes the other animals too. I mean, he also celebrates and catalogs so many of the other animals, and the animals do not whine about their condition. They do not spend their evenings, you know, grieving about God. They do not, you know. I mean, to him, all the other animals were teachers for us as well, you know. I wish you were here today. I too was at the Morgan Library.
It's happening now.
I too. It's happening now, isn't it? What I said before, it's true. Anyway, we can move on to Blake, because Blake is totally spiritually a brother to Whitman.
Different. In the realm of spirit, so little of the specificity and the actuality of the raw, rugged living.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know how he wrote, you know? Somebody said to Mrs. Blake, how does Blake write? And he said, they looked into the fire and they waited for the words to come. I mean, he was just you know, it all just came right directly through him.
And I think that's why Anne Gilchrist turned to him, because she, having spent her life in science, which failed to save her husband, had to turn to spirit to calibrate.
Yeah.
Yeah. And some of the lines in Auguries of Innocence are so mysterious to me.
Oh, let's read some.
The poison of the honeybee is the artist's jealousy. What do you make of that?
Say it again.
The poison of the honeybee is the artist's jealousy.
Oh, I understand that.
Tell us.
Well, is the artist the jealous one? So
Of the poison. The artist is the jealous of the poison.
or the poison of the bee is jealousy
Oh.
that the artist suffers. I mean, everybody here knows jealousy hurts so much, right? It hurts us more than the person we're jealous of. It's awful. It's toxic. We're sickened by it. It is poison. It's interesting that he said artists, you know.
And he doesn't put an apostrophe, a possessive in there. It's artists, plural. Very strange.
But I wonder, does he use, he doesn't use apostrophes for a lot
For
of.
most of them.
Yeah, like butcher's knife. So you know some of the famous ones. To see a world in a grain of sand and heaven in a wild flower. Let's just stop there.
One of the most enduring pieces of art of all time.
To hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. Emily Dickinson, eternity is composed of nows. 'Tis not a different time. Eternity is composed of nows. 'Tis not a different time. She's Zen, right? She's a Buddhist, essentially. So a robin breast in a cage puts all heaven in a rage.
A truth that's told with bad intent beats all the lies you can invent.
There you go, right? Or a dog starved at his master's gate predicts the ruin of the state. We could say a child starved, right, at her master's gate predicts the ruin of the state.
But what's so strange about this form is that they're part nursery rhymes, part koans, part indictments, part invitations. I mean, he's doing something very unusual here.
Well, it does sound like a children's game, and that's why it's Auguries of Innocence, right? Because
But they have a real,
oh, totally, yeah. I mean, each outcry of the hunted hare, a fiber from the brain does tear. I mean, he was vegetarian, he was absolutely a pacifist, and the Industrial Revolution, you know, I mean, London was a terrible place to live. All the chimney sweep boys were dying of lung disease. People were living under terrible conditions, children especially, were all working. And I feel as if, again, we want to resuscitate these and bring them out now I feel as if there was a, what would you call it, a Substack, you know, Blake, it would just be one a day, you know, and you open your thing and it would say, the owl that calls upon the night speaks the unbeliever's fright.
well, Blake was actually the original Substack.
Yeah, he was.
Because so at the time, this was kind of his side gig. His real work was the visual art and the engraving. And he was really frustrated at how cumbersome the engraving process was. To make a single piece of art, you needed a whole workshop with someone to do the etching, someone to do the pressing, someone to do the printing. So, I am with him with the idea that the best way to complain is to create and invent. So he invented a whole new process where he would take the paper, paint it with paint the image he wanted with acid-resistant paint, then dip the thing in acid so that what he painted would remain and everything else would be eaten away, and then he would use that to press on. So he became a one-man workshop for what would have ordinarily taken a whole actual workshop of people. So he was able to make his own art and put it into the world in a way nobody had before. It's like a one-man, it's like Substack, the artist as a one channel to put his art out there, which is incredible.
They're gorgeous too. They're so gorgeous. And he turned everything upside down. He hated the church so much because of their money, and they're stealing from people, and they're selling things, and the proverbs of heaven and hell are all flipped upside down.
Well, he literally had to flip his hand up because the one problem with his process was that it printed everything in reverse.
The opposite.
So he taught himself mirror writing, writing backwards in order for it to be legible forwards on the image.
That's interesting, Maria. So he actually could practice the opposite of what he was saying. That's another great daily practice, isn't it? To say, to say what you say and turn it around and see what happens. If something you're complaining about, turn it into something you praise. I'm just trying to think about.
Well, tell this exercise you give your students about the animal they most.
Oh, well, for years, maybe somebody's here. For years, I was teaching eco-poetry at Sarah Lawrence, and I still will again, but I've taken a break this year because, it's so sad when we learn. So one of the first years I did it, I asked everybody, what's your favorite other animal besides humans? And so everybody think that now. Think of what your favorite other animal is right now. It's hard to choose, I know. And you can't. Everything is so amazing. But now, what's the animal you really, really don't feel good about? Like you really don't want to be in a room with it. Maybe it's a crocodile or a wasp or whatever, a rat, things we fear, or just dislike. And then I asked each of them to learn everything they could about the animal they did not like. And of course, they came to feel very differently about that animal. There's so much we just don't know, as a matter of course, about the other animals. And we don't know that birds actually sing in language that each other, beyond mating and battle, they actually say other things, and that whales have different voices. Now we're slowly learning these little things. But what was the point of all that? I lost myself in.
That when you get to know.
Oh yes, when something becomes familiar. The other day I was thinking, what was one of my happiest moments last summer? And we have a place upstate that's just a summer house, and it brings me great joy to be up there with my dog Jack. And so every day Jack just goes out on the deck and lives there. And I put a dish of water out there, and I put a dish of water inside by the fridge. And during the heat waves, remember this last summer, unbelievable, 98 degrees, 98, 98, 98. Jack would get up and drink from the water dish and then go back under the couch and into the shade. And I would just be gazing out there. And then a bird would come and light on the water dish and drink from the same water dish. And then the bird would fly away. And then a bee came and perched on the side of the water dish and drank from the same water. And I was like, oh, I was just so moved. And then I turned around, and we've been trying to kill the mice in our house for weeks. And out from behind the fridge comes a mouse and drinks from the indoor water dish. And I'm like, oh, I didn't want to kill that mouse anymore. It was like, oh, I'm so glad, it's so hot, I'm so glad. Do you want some ice, because then it became specific, and every one of those creatures who came to that water dish within half an hour, a hummingbird came, It was like.
But wasn't that the point of the exercise with your students?
Yeah.
They became love poems in the end when you get to the specificity.
Except for one person who never got over the rats. We argued about it. It was bad. But everybody else, they really came around. They came around. I wanted to kind of read the thing about what a poet. Whitman says at one point, he writes this preface, Maria mentioned, to Leaves of Grass, which I always thought was kind of unreadable. The poem is so great, and the preface is kind of well, him talking, you know, and another thing, and another thing. But this time, I read it through again in preparation for our being together here, and I was really very moved by it. And I shook my head at my younger self, who didn't have the patience to read through all that prose. But he said at one point, he said, to be a poet, to be a poem, and he thinks we all can be a poet. He doesn't in any way feel like it's special to be a poet. He says, this is what you shall do. Love the earth and sun and the animals. Despise riches. Give alms to everyone that asks. Now, I want us to get down about this, right? Imagine leaving here today and deciding you're going to try and do this. We pass a lot of people who ask for money. And it's hard to despise riches when you live in New York and you walk by some pretty things in a window, right?
Walking with Marie through Manhattan is very slow business because she stops with every person who asks for alms.
No, not everybody. But the point is, this is rigorous, is what I'm saying, right? Let's not just let it go by us as pretty language. So he says, this is what you shall do. Love the earth and sun and the animals. Despise riches. Give alms to everyone that asks. Stand up for the stupid and crazy. Devote your income and labor to others. Hate tyrants. Argue not concerning God. Have patience and indulgence towards the people. Take off your hat to nothing known or unknown, or to any man or number of men. Go freely with powerful, uneducated persons, and with the young, and with the mothers of families. Then he goes, read these leaves, his book, right? Read these leaves in the open air every season of every year of your life. Re-examine all you've been told at school or church or in any book, except his book. Dismiss whatever insults your own soul, and your very flesh shall be a great poem, and have the richest fluency, not only in its words, but in the silent lines of its lips and face, and between the lashes of your eyes, and in every motion and joint of your body.
Between the lashes of your eyes, in every cell.
Yeah, that's really every atom belonging to. When did people know about atoms?
Oh, well, Dalton was, what, 1805-ish? I mean, yes, Democritus in Greece, greatly suppressed by Aristotle, erased for 2,000 years, and then John Dalton and the birth of atomic theory.
So you're living in Manhattan, you're living in New York.
But I want to say this little piece from Anne Gilchrist.
Oh, good.
Who, to your question, so this is half a century before the dawn of quantum mechanics and particle physics. This is in her piece about leaves of grass, in her review. First she says, the poet takes you by the hand and turns you with your face straight forwards. The present is great enough for him because he is great enough for it. It flows through him as vast oceanic tide lifting up a mighty voice. And then she laments that with the exception of science, humanity has long chosen thought leaders who have their faces turned backwards.
Oh, yes.
Who have made of the past the tyrant that beggars and scorns the present. And then she talks about Whitman as the opposite. And then she adds, this is so prescient, this is 1863. No, yes, 1863. Perhaps we have been equally deceived at the opposite end of the scale. Perhaps the fundamental idea we have of solid matter, that its particles are relatively at rest, may be overthrown, and ceaseless motion proved the condition of existence for atoms as for worlds.
For atoms as for worlds?
This is 57 years before the birth of quantum mechanics, which is exactly this.
Yeah, movement.
Yeah.
What's interesting is Whitman in his preface says, we are not a country that looks backwards. Mm-hmm. And
that's
she echoes it.
To.
He says, we are not a country that looks backwards. Back there is colonialism, that's the empire. We're not that. We're ahead. And of course, he's responding to Emerson, who wrote an essay in the Atlantic magazine saying, where's the American poet?
Yeah.
All we're reading is fake British poetry, essentially, you know. This is a new country, where is the new voice? Where is the voice that can speak from this wild, huge, crazy experiment? And Whitman reads that essay and says, c'est moi, me, I can do it. And he's unleashed. He said, I was simmering and simmering and simmering until I read Emerson's
Emerson brought me to a boil.
essay, yeah. And then it came through him, just boom. Amazing.
And Emerson then wrote to him this beautiful personal letter. I greet you at the start of a great career. And Whitman held it in his breast pocket, read it to Fred, the Irish coach driver that was his lover. And then he printed it gilded on the spine of the next edition as this unauthorized blurb. And Emerson was so upset. So 4 years later, they took a walk together in Boston Commons and kind of had a talking to about the ethics of that.
Yeah, it wasn't nice. Well, that's the great thing about Whitman. The man is vulnerable, and he has faults like all of us.
Well, the multitudes, right?
Yeah, he says, I contain multitudes.
Absolute humility and absolute ego.
But he also was able to be a kind of portal for this voice, you know, and it doesn't happen that often. Really doesn't.
And with that, can we close with your beautiful poem, Hymn?
What time is it?
It is time. It is time.
Is it really?
I know.
So fast.
It goes fast.
It's so good to be with you all. And Maria, it's so good to be with you.
So good to be with you.
So Whitman was one of the writers who constantly inspires me to imagine what is not, what other people would say is foolish to imagine. And I feel like it is our job now, I mean really, maybe our only important task is to imagine the world we want to live in. And I mean big imagine, big, 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 not, you know, small. That Blake said, what is now proved was once only imagined. What was once only imagined. I mean, remember way back when in this country you wouldn't even tell someone if you were gay? It's changed, things change, but big things can change. And I think it takes, I think we have to give up worrying about whether people are going to say we're childish or ridiculous. There's a great poem by Derek Walcott, the wonderful poet from St. Lucia. And he was my teacher at Columbia a long time ago. And he wrote one of the greatest poems called The Season of Phantasmal Peace. It's this big, and it's a vision. And I carried that poem around in my heart for 40 years. And Whitman and Derek are both behind how this poem just came out, and I think it's really because of those two poets.
And so, can I just add that what I find so moving, Marie always says, if we don't imagine it, they will, right? The gun makers and the
people who want to make money.
Yeah.
The people who will commodify everything, and the people who make the bombs, and the military. Well, Eisenhower, our president, said what I fear most is the military-industrial complex. And we've seen, even the movie makers, how many times have you seen New York City destroyed in the movies? Really? You know, the Statue of Liberty underwater, things blowing up. And what if we imagine the opposite of that? I mean, really. Because the people, there is this thanatos and eros, right? It's the death urge and the urge to life. The death urge sells because we're intoxicated by it. So, but eros is what gives life, and that means to imagine. Anyway, that's a big build-up for a small poem. It's not about my poem. I want to make this perfectly clear. It's not my poem at all. And I don't even call it my poem because it really seemed to come through me. but it's for all of us to make it, if we possibly can, more of a practice, that's all. I think we should have 12-step programs called Imagining the Future. My name is Marie, and I'm imagining the future. I'd be okay. We'll start after this reading. After we'll meet back there, and we'll establish the first 12-step meetings. It's called Hymn, and it's a hymn like a song, like a sacred song. So it's H-Y-M-N, and it begins with a hum that's a human hum. It began as an almost inaudible hum, low and long for the solar winds and far dim galaxies. A hymn growing louder for the moon and the sun, a song without words for the snow falling, for snow, conceiving rain, the rivers rushing without shame, the hum turning again higher into a riff of ridges, peaks hard as consonants, summits and praise for the rocky faults and crust and crevices, then down to the roots and rocks and burrows, the lake's skittery surfaces, wells, oceans, breaking waves, the salt deep, the warm bodies moving within it, the cold deep, the deep underneath gleaming. Some of us rising as the planet turned into dawn, some lying down as it turned into dark. As each of us rested, another woke, standing among the cast-off cartons and automobiles. We left the factories and stood in the parking lots, left the subways and stood on the sidewalks, in the bright offices, in the cluttered yards, in the farmed fields, in the mud of the shanty towns, breaking into harmonies we had not known possible, finding the chords as we found our true place, singing in a million keys the human hymn of praise for every something else there is and ever was and will be, the song growing louder and rising. Listen, I too believed it was a dream. Thank you.
Thank you. Two things. Marie's book, her new and selected poems, is out there signed, and you can get it. And also, we're going to take a couple of questions. There are roving mics.
Wait, Maria, say Maria's Universe in Verse anthology book is also.
Which opens with Marie's poem, Singularity.
But it's extraordinary, and I urge you to get it. It's really amazing.
So please make your questions end with a question mark and be brief and pertinent to our conversation. Okay, where is the mic? Jennifer has the mic. Or we'd just go to the 12-step meeting for imagining.
I'm willing to start the 12-step meeting. What was the name of the Derek Walcott poem that you mentioned?
The Season of Phantasmal Peace. It's this big, peace, P-E-A-C-E. It's a. I won't paraphrase it.
I'm from the Caribbean and I love him. So.
Yeah, San Lucia. Where are you from?
St. Thomas.
Ah. He's a king. Derek was a king on the planet.
Love After Love, one of my favorite poems of all time.
Which one? Oh,
Love
yeah.
After Love. Okay, well.
Hey, right here.
Right here.
Out of curiosity, what's your origin story? How did you cross paths? And how did the two of you meet?
Pardon me?
How did the two of you connect?
How did we meet?
I don't even remember. I've always known you.
I mean, I've always known. I do remember we were at some very fancy.
Oh, I remember now, yes.
Thing. And I was like, oh my God, that's Marie Howe. I can't talk to her.
No, Maria, Maria does the Marginalian, and before then it was Brain Pickings, and it was, I read it all the time. And we were at this very fancy thing when I was shy, and I always have to be on the edge of things so I can slip away. And so I came, and there was someone sitting also on the edge. And I said, do you mind if I sit next to you? And she said, not at all. I'm going to not last very long. I'm like, me either. And it was this one. And we were like, bzzz. But I feel like I've always known you, Maria. I don't remember
I feel that way too.
life before I
What
knew
the
you.
living do? Yes, yes.
But yeah, it's so fortunate, isn't it, when you meet people who constantly, Maria is just, what she understands about the world and science and the whole history. She has the kind of mind that she remembers everything she reads. I don't remember what happened yesterday. I don't. So it's a real vulnerability. But she remembers. She can tell you how many seconds ago something happened. I joke with you about this, but she just said backstage, the last time I had a cold, it was 2012. I rest my case. Where were you in 2012? Do you know? I don't know where I was. I don't know. So it's a very different mind that I get to be in relationship with Maria Popova. Yeah.
This is a very active corner over here. You guys, okay, we'll take one more question.
Thank you. This has just been such a wonderful evening and so stimulating and fun. What other poets do you recommend these days to see?
Oh, no, you can't do that.
I'll tell you.
No, I mean besides you two.
I have really fallen under Rebecca Elson's spell. Before I knew that she and Marie were in a program together at Radcliffe, Rebecca Elson was an astronomer, very gifted young astronomer, one of the first scientists to work with Hubble images. And then when she was 29, she was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma and given just a few years to live. And she lived another 10 years, in the course of which she wrote absolutely beautiful poetry about life and death and the universe and our place in it, but as a scientist who actually understands and doesn't just kind of pilfer science for metaphor, which is something I really don't like in poetry. And when she died, she left behind 56 scientific papers, which is a huge amount. She was a year younger than I am now. She was 39 when she died. And this slender book called A Responsibility to Awe, which is a line from one of her poems. What a fantastic concept, if we all lived with a responsibility to awe. Anyway, that book had fallen long out of print some years ago, but now it's back, and it is one of my favorite books of all time.
What's her last name?
Rebecca Elson, E-L-S-O-N.
And it's another example of those golden threads that seem invisible. Maria kept talking about this astronomer, Rebecca Elson, and I'm like, for a while, and I'm like, wait a minute, you mean Becky?
No, that's not what happened. At your house, on the
There was a
board,
photograph.
there was like a black and white Xerox of, and I was like, is this Rebecca Elson? And Marie was like, Becky?
And because she was always talking about, and it was shocking. I'm like, oh my God, you're Rebecca Elson, it's Becky. And I this shows the difference in our brains again.
But it's also such a testament to how erasure and forgetting, how important. I found out about her because Jocelyn Bell Burnell, who discovered pulsars, she's one of the greatest scientists of the 20th century, happens to love poetry, and she edited a British anthology of poems about science called Dark Matter, long out of print, but I got a used copy, and in it there was this one Rebecca Elson poem that was just the crowning curio of the whole thing. And I was like, who is this person? I went down the rabbit hole, found her out of print book, ended up working her into this show that I do, The Universe in Verse, and people loved her. And now she's with us all the time. Let them not die, right?
Becky was wonderful. Yeah, I know. And she had her own galaxy that she studied. far, far, far away. But it was all beyond us. But we had a writing group at the Radcliffe seminars. Yeah, it was Becky. Anyway, it would be impossible for me to give a list of contemporary poets because there are so many great poets right now. But and right now what I'm doing in my classes is I'm teaching the great dead poets to my students because how quickly we forget. So we've been reading Whitman, we've been reading Emily Dickinson, we've been reading, we're going to be reading Gwendolyn Brooks, we're going to be reading, what's his name? Middle Passage, you know. Somebody help me. Does someone, pardon me? No, but thank you. But you know, you can just start anywhere, and then you begin to follow the strings. I can't say contemporary.
Last question, anyone?
Thank you, everyone, for your presence here. Is there one more? One last? Oh, sorry. Is there one last?
I think we wrap it up because I have to catch the last ferry to Brooklyn.
Right.
So.
Thank you.